Hello, and welcome to another Cloud Podcast, a podcast designed to bring you stories from the smartest minds in IT, operations, and business, and learn how they're using cloud technology to improve business and the customer experience. Well, Troy Shaffer, it's great to have you on the podcast today. How was your weekend?
Weekend has been awesome. It was good weather, some downtime, had the family around, so it's been all good.
Awesome. Yeah, it's not bad. We get the blessing of being in Southern California with the great weather. Winter, I put those in quotation marks, is never really harsh, but man, when the spring hits and we get these 70-degree days all day long, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Absolutely. Well, it's great to have you. And for those that don't know, you're with Scan Health Services, and you're the VP of Contact Center Operations. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and got your way into the contact center realm, and kind of kick it off from there and get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I was with another health carrier for probably about 8 years or so in the quality area, and also supporting contact center work from that aspect. So did that. Then the opportunity came around with Scan, and really kind of got focused on the nonprofit end of things, and really very mission driven. So, our mission is to keep seniors healthy and independent. And so typically the majority of our membership is over 65 in the Medicare Advantage space. And so just seemed to be a really good fit, and it's definitely mission driven work on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you mentioned that before when we spoke last time about how there's a fine balance between how do you keep the mission going with the members, but then also like the moral aspect. And in the contact center world, a lot of times it's people are driving to lower the cost, driving for first call resolution, driving to hit those KPIs, but you don't want that to infringe upon the mission of the organization, which it easily can do in so many cases. How do you balance that with what you're doing in the contact center and also keeping the mission alive?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key word, is balance, right? So I look at it like a relationship. So we like to think it would be 50-50 every day. But sometimes that's 80-20, and sometimes it's 20-80, right? And so, obviously in our world, there is a, regulatory perspective of it. So you have to make sure that you're doing things within regs. And then there's a service component, and then there's the member as well. So there's kind of this KPI balance with member experience, and how do you truly balance that? So, with it being mission driven, from the top down to the front lines, it's really understood that we're going to go the extra mile and take care of our members in every way we can.
And try to drill into that a little bit more. What type of KPIs do you look at on a regular basis? Let's say every day or week, you're always looking at, is it CSAT? Is it quality monitoring scores? Is it average handle time? Like, what are the top, 3, 4, or 5 that you look at?
Yeah, when you say that, I mean, when you look at it from a contact center perspective, it's your standards, right? So service level, did you answer, 80% of the calls in 30 seconds? You look at average speed to answer, you look at abandon rate. So those are some of the key ones. But then that point that balances it out is MSAT. We have what we call like a balanced scorecard for our advocates. So, the quality aspect is there as well. So there's kind of multiple levers along the way, but if you wanted to look at it from core KPIs, it's really those key ones that we're held to from a regulatory perspective. And then, as our discussion went earlier, is just how do you balance that? One of the things that we look at, I think, is unique, is that it's not this timer, right? So, in other organizations I've been with, it's like 3 minutes, hang up, get off the call, 3 minutes, hang up, get off the call, where this is truly more of a one call resolution. What is the member calling about? And so we've trained our advocates to really understand and find those triggers to understand, okay, what are we trying to solve for here? And then work to solve that. So that is kind of a big difference that I see in our organization.
And with a 65 plus demographic, are you seeing mainly phone calls, chats, emails, tickets? What's the normal volume? Is it heavy to one side, or is it kind of all over the place?
Yeah, so it's interesting you had asked that. I think there's a misnomer out there that, hey, over 65, they want to just pick up the phone and call. And so that's kind of, the norm right now. But when you start to look at it from an omni-channel perspective and really look at the strategy kind of going forward, then that starts to change up a little bit. So, the whole kind of notion of meet the member where they want to be met and when they do, we're kind of on that journey right now, right? So we've opened up, our web. We've done a lot of work on our website, which has made that a lot more friendly, a lot more flexibility in our website. And then you look at kind of, some of the other like SMS and two-way text and some of the things we're starting to dabble in. But the key with 65 and over is that you had to remember there's kind of these age ins, so they're not quite 65 yet. And they're aging in with kind of a lot of technology and savvy, and don't discount our 80-year-olds either, right? Because they're out there on Facebook and Instagram with the grandkids, and especially with this pandemic and being able to really communicate in those channels. So it's a broad band, and I think it just depends on the individual more than it does like a number.
Totally makes sense. Alex, I was over Easter weekend, I was hanging out with the in-laws, and we were playing cards. We're playing a game, and we all had our phones next to each other. And the in-laws we caught them on their phones more than we were on our phones. I think they're like 69 and 68, and we had to call them out on it, be like, "Hey, get off your phones!" And when the phones got put away, they're using their Apple Watches to check up on their friends and stuff. And I was like, "Wow, this is a little bit of a switch, a role reversal."
They're the cool grandparents, apparently.
You thought you're going to have to maintain the kids, right?
That's right. You got to keep up. I mean, when you think about it, you're absolutely right. It's like, and I think COVID, you mentioned earlier, like before, is that it's accelerated everything. Even if grandparents or people in that 65 plus demographic maybe weren't on it as much, they're almost forced to be on it now, right? Now they're forced to be on FaceTime with their grandkids or their kids, or just friends in general, because they need to have community, and you couldn't do that in person last year for a very long time. But now it's transitioned to, to that generation, but then also to the business side. So now it's like, well, shoot, we can offer these services to our clients or to our members now. And it's like, how fast do we roll that out, or how do you scale that up, right? It was like to bring that into the fruition if you hadn't already.
Right. Yeah. I think that it's kind of the journey, right? And the roadmap. I think, having talked to a number of colleagues in various different, service areas, really is like, how well prepared were you? What is kind of your business continuity plan? How fast were you able to really pivot and then kind of maintain, right? So, I think that is a key piece, because if you can pivot, but do you have the monitoring and control in place? Are you able to understand, capacity? And then there's kind of this, what we've seen is there's this natural bubble. So there was like, send, maybe 300 people home, and everyone's excited, right? I get to work at home. I get to kind of, at lunchtime, go do laundry. I get to do all of these different things that I never had time to do before. And then you get to this new norm of, well, okay, we're not in the office, and I'm not having cooler talk every time. So then there's this kind of, missing piece there. And then now it goes back to, okay, this is the new norm. And so there's this kind of roller coaster that we're seeing. And then how do you match the engagement, the ongoing training? There's a number of things that we continue to kind of put earmarks on.
Yeah, I think one of the huge advantages that you guys had is that you were in the cloud when it happened, right? So you didn't have to make this huge leap to get up to speed technology wise. Were you with Scan when you guys went from prem to the cloud on the contact center platform?
Yeah, so that's a little bit different and a little bit out of the realm of where I've been involved with. I've been with Scan, and ours was really more around the system itself and what we do to really kind of monitor and then flip that switch to be able to still maintain in a virtual environment.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What Troy, what projects do you have planned for 2021? Is it really just what is the new norm? Do we continue supporting people working from home, but also try to bring people back in? Like, what are your 2021 goals? I know we're already a quarter into it, so we don't have much time left, but do you guys have any projects on the horizon?
Yeah, so I mean, to answer that, it'd really be more to stabilize, right? It's really, when I talked a little bit earlier around just that bubble of engagement and really monitoring, because that's another balance point is your employee engagement. So not only the member satisfaction and kind of hitting KPIs, there's also a employee perspective. So really monitoring that piece right now. So there's not a lot of hot and new projects right now. It's really more stabilization, really kind of look at the new norm. We're probably going to be remote for the foreseeable future, and just really start to build on that piece, ensure that our managers and our supervisors have the right tools, that they're comfortable in what they're able to address remotely.
Yeah, with that new norm, right, and people working from home, and what I'd like to understand a little bit is just the challenges, right, for the other contact center operations, VPs and managers and directors out there, or what are some of the challenges that you ran up against, maybe say like when COVID first hit, and then just challenges that you're looking to fix moving forward into 2021 that maybe some people haven't considered or haven't even hit yet, so that they can get a leg up when it does.
Yeah, no, good question. I think, to be candid, it's really more of the personal issues that were going on, right? So it happened so fast, at least from my lens, right? It happened so fast that when you look at our workforce population that had children, for example, and the schools were kind of all over the place, depending on what county you were in. Either they're closing right away or they're going to be closing, and so there was a lot of uncertainty that went into that. And so you can imagine those that had, younger kids, what did that mean? How are they going to adjust? Those that had, from a caregiver perspective and had elders in their home or parents that they had to care for, what are they going to do to get them to appointments and doctors shutting down? What is that? So we faced a lot of that piece of it. And that's where I go back to just really the core of what SCAN is about, and being able to be flexible. To be able to kind of manage through that. So, say for instance, it wasn't a perfect world and you had kids in the background, yelling, or you had dogs barking in the back, and our members tend to embrace that. They're like, oh, honey, don't worry about that. We understand, times are really rough right now. We haven't been through this. And so there was this period of time where that was acceptable. And then we got to the point where we said, okay, now we need to get back to professional. We need to get back to business. So as things stabilize, we need you, our staff, to really kind of get those things under control, have a secured workspace that's non-disruptive, and then we kind of evolved to that. So I would say that was the biggest piece. I think the other one is just the hands-on and folks being able to kind of go and look, at a queue and raise their hands. So really getting our tools together, through Skype or Teams or, those communication channels and escalations. How do we handle those? So really being able to handle that in a remote environment versus just kind of so much being, dependent on kind of face-to-face.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. So from a collaboration tool internally, are you guys leveraging Zoom for that, Teams for that? Sounds like you guys have like Slack as well. What are you using, and is it effective? Does it work? So, if you're in a physical office, you have a problem, you raise your hand, supervisor comes by, you can look at the problem together, solve it, kind of move on. But in a virtual environment, that's a lot harder to do. Are you guys finding challenges with that virtual environment? Do you guys have the right setup? Is it good enough? Like, tell us a little bit about that collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. I would probably say good enough right now. We want to get, beyond, good and start getting back to great, right? That's kind of the standards that I like to operate under. But I would say good enough to get the job done. Mostly Zoom is really kind of the core tool that we're able to communicate with, still the old Outlook, Skype, things like that, being able to, use that and transform that into the remote environment. But I would say that is kind of I would say we kind of have the basics in play, and the longer we stay in this environment and kind of continue to march on, then from a strategic perspective, we're definitely looking at what's going to be best long term.
Yeah, you see a lot of shakeup in just the collaboration space right now. I mean, Zoom with Zoom and their voice product that they essentially launched last year, and the timing couldn't have been better for them. And seeing how they're a great, collaboration video tool, conferencing tool, and now all of a sudden they're getting to the voice, And then you have Microsoft making integrations available for all these different UCaaS providers and contact center providers. And I feel like right now the collaboration space is in such in a way, it's like an upheaval. You see consolidation, you see Slack being such a big player. I'm surprised they haven't been gobbled up yet by like a Ring Central or, Vonage or someone large, right? To take that piece and bring it into their ecosystem. So it's definitely a challenge, I can imagine, for a leader in the industry to say, we've got these disparate systems. You have Zoom over here, you have your contact center platform here. Everyone's on their Outlook email most likely with Microsoft, and it's like it's hard to manage all those disparate systems. I can imagine, on a day-to-day basis too.
Yeah, and I mean, the key, at least what I've learned over time, at least throughout my career, is the partnership with IT, right? And that is, so many folks, at least, some of the folks I've talked to, like they always want to say, well, is the business, in control, or is IT in control? Is the dog wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog?
Yep.
And I think that kind of mentality automatically starts to put up the silos and the walls versus, hey, we're a partnership in this thing. And that's the one thing, again, is that what are we trying to do? We're member centric. And so we're trying to solve issues and problems for the member, not what's good for me, the business, or what's good for IT and what's the shiny bright technology. So what I've learned, at least that's been successful for us, is to really partner. And then it's about, okay, what are the requirements? What are the timelines? And then just the standards, right? So technology, people, and process. And when you get those things right, and those are the key levers, then which ones can you control that aren't really budget or dollar perspective? So to put in a new system is going to cost you dollars, right? So if that's not an option, how can I optimize my processes and my people, which I have a lot more control on, to get done what we need done?
Yeah, and earlier you talked about coming from a quality lens, and then also MSATs, member satisfaction, is a very, very important score for you guys and KPI for you guys. But also in your industry, there's a lot of hurdles you have to go through, a lot of compliances. You got all sorts of things like PCI and HIPAA. You probably have CCPA and GDPR, all these 4-letter compliances that could kind of get in the way of a good member experience. Like 2-factor authentication can be very frustrating for someone, especially if they're not comfortable with doing it with other systems. So how do you guys combat that? How do you guys combat when a member is getting frustrated because they have to go through some sort of compliance, or they have to double check or do a 2-factor authentication? How do you guys work through that?
Yeah, so great point. I think I'm a sports guy, and so for those that aren't, I apologize, but from a football perspective, right? When you look at kind of the way the field is stretched out, there's out of bounds on the side, and then there's end zone to end zone, right? So we know that's the confines that you need to play within. And so I see regulatory similar to that. Is like, understand what those boundaries are and how do you work within them. And then when it comes down to a member's perspective, it's really about them, right? So when you talk to them from an aspect of, hey, we really want to get to the core of your problem. We want to resolve this for you. For your protection, there's a couple of things that we need to really kind of make sure that we're able to go through first. And so we really and that's authentic, right? That's about them, is protecting their information and really driving home the point that we want to make sure that this is you, and that or if there's a person talking on their behalf, that they're actually authorized to work on their behalf. And once we get that out of the way, they're really clear on, oh, thanks so much. And then we're able to go off to the races from there.
Yeah, regulatory is interesting. I like that example of the football field. And just to bring it back to sports, as a quick question, who's your team in the Final Four or the championship tonight? It's gonna be Gonzaga or Baylor?
This would be a question that says, I don't have a dog in the fight now, right? I drank the SC Kool-Aid because my kids went there, and so once they took out of it, it was kind of like, whoever, yeah, there you go, fight on. So yeah, I would say, I don't have a dog in the fight. I guess I kind of like Gonzaga. I think Baylor is really a tough feat, but they had a good showing the other night, so that would be my pick for now.
That's good. I just thought I'd wrap that in there. But getting back to it, I was curious. So we talked about like the agent, right? And how it's about keeping with the company mission and really taking care of the members at SCAN. How do how are the skills parsed out? Is it one agent handles the full call, or is it if there's a certain escalation, it goes to some another group? How does that work with over at Scan as far as like, the agents and what they can do on a call?
Yeah, we're a big believer in kind of one call resolution, and that tends to be a buzzword across the industry, and I think people do it to different degrees. So the challenge there is that you need to have a generalist skill set to be able to handle multiple different call types, but then how deep can you go as well to really solve for those issues? So I think the other piece that I talked about earlier is without that, get off the phone in 2 minutes or 3 minutes and really giving our advocates the autonomy and to be quite frank, the empowerment to really drive solutions for members, then that puts a whole nother scope on it, and it's another ball game at that point. So we do train broadly, and then some of that is just experience over time. So, the more things you're exposed to, the more, issues that you're able to resolve for. So we have a broad lens, and if they don't know the answer, they have kind of the forgiveness, so to say, to, if you can hold on one moment, let me research. So they have, plenty of tools to research. When it's really an escalated issue or a member that's beyond their scope, they're able to kind of then get, additional help. But in general, it's to kind of go broad and deep versus kind of one-offs and done. So.
And so the follow-up question to that, and this is more kind of a leadership style, way of thinking, is like, how do you keep the agents happy? How do you keep them engaged in the culture working? Because obviously if it's a generalist and becoming, the better they become, the harder it is to lose someone like that. How do you coach, or how do you lead the team to where your retention stays as high as possible?
Yeah, so although generalist is kind of the goal, there is defined career paths as well, right?
Okay.
And so as you look at what is that next step, and what do you want to achieve as an individual. So in my opinion, it's not I wouldn't say more than 50% of the people want to just stay in as a frontline advocate their entire career, right? They're going to want to grow. They're going to do some things different. So what are we as leaders really doing to make sure we understand what are their individual goals? What are their capabilities? What are their skill sets? Where can we help them grow? Where do we need to coach? And then my motto is really like, I love you as a member service advocate, and I love you to be in the member services family. But if you have other goals and aspirations, then let me try to help you find those, hopefully within Scan, right? Because then now I have a well-developed, well-trained employee that will then now go and help in other parts of the organization. And at the end of the day, that's helping our member. So my goal is not necessarily, keep them within member services if that's their path and that's what they want to do, but more broadly within Scan. And then if not, then just kind of the human side of things is like, if you don't help them, they're going to go regardless, right? So what have I done to give them kind of that grounding and that background from a career perspective that they'll carry on as transferable skills no matter where they go?
Yeah, and we know happy and engaged employees means happy customers, happy members. You could hear, we've heard this before, you could hear the smile on the employees' face, even though they're just talking over the phone. So pre-pandemic, you had all these opportunities to do things like birthday parties and, taking them to lunch and all these cool and fun activities that are there in the contact center. Now that we're at a work from home environment, do you have any fun things that you're doing with the team? Is there like a watch party where they're all watching the same movie at the same time and talking over Zoom? Tell us some tips and tricks for the people who are listening who might need to spice up their employee engagement programs.
Yeah, I wish we could do watch parties, but part of that needs to be on the phone, right? So there's kind of that day job that has to get done. But we try to do that through team meetings. We've done a lot more video. And so from a leadership perspective, really having more one-off videos on, hey, we appreciate kind of your contributions. We appreciate kind of, the last month's, results. And then we'll do some, fun videos of just kind of like, hey, it's Friday, and have some music put to that. And so they can kind of go out on the SharePoint and get some of those things. We continue with the recognition. So, what we used to do is pull them off, those that were like either the top teams, top scores, pull them off, have a little snack, and go from there. Whereas today you have to just get creative and put that into a presentation mode. So they tend to get pretty excited about that. Every once in a while, if the budget allows, sometime we're able to do kind of like some Grubhub and give people the opportunity to get a little snack or lunch from there. But a lot of it is just really more concise videos and impact to there. We're still looking at that. We've engaged what we call like an engagement committee. And so we have, kind of folks from all levels of the organization really trying to drive home what would be exciting to you and how do we drive that. We've done some interesting things. We do some graduations with folks to get through their training. And so what this has allowed us to do is now you can bring your family to that, right? Whereas before, it's just them. So we've seen dogs, cats, kids, all kinds of things that came from that. And we've been like, hey, give them a little headset, because now we have more capacity to get them going. So it's been pretty fun to play on the family side of that as well.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love, graduation ceremonies, bringing the family and keeping them involved. That's cool. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely working. When I was on their website this morning, you get 4.5 out of 5 stars by Medicare, 4 years running for for happy members. I mean, you guys are definitely doing it right. And I think all of us being in California and having probably one of the hardest hit states outside of New York with COVID, and having like all these limitations brought around so quickly at middle of March last year, I can imagine the challenges like you're saying and how hard it is, right? Where a lot of states are kind of getting back to a different normal, but kind of moving out, where we're still in it here, in LA County and where you guys are. And I think, like you said, the challenge is being that looking towards the future and kind of figuring out where it's all going. And but I think gamification and like wall boards, like, how big is the organization on just doing that sort of thing with gamification? Do you guys use wall boards? I've heard mixed reviews on how people view wall boards and stuff like that.
Yeah, we're definitely working on building out the gamification piece specifically. I've seen a lot of different software out there and different companies that do that pretty well. And we're researching that to see kind of what may work for us. I think wall boards are interesting in how you use them. So for me, gamification needs to be a healthy gamification, right? Mm-hmm. So the key piece that I always, insist on is that it's collaborative in nature and it's fun competition, right? So I'm a competitive person, and if the three of us are in a game, you can bet that I'm going to look to finish first, right? That's just kind of my nature and my DNA. But I'm not going to do it at the expense of a member, right? And so that is the piece that we really try to drive home from our leadership perspective, is say, hey, let's have healthy competition. Let's talk some smack to each other. Let's see who's going to kind of finish at the top, but never at the expense of a member. So wall boards, kind of to your point, I think it's good to understand the numbers and understand where you lie. So although you're not kind of on this 3-minute timer, if you look up and you see calls in queue, then that's an indicator like, I need to try to wrap this if I can, because my teammates are hurting, right? And at the end of that, maybe there's some members, that are waiting in queue. So I think they're good indicators. I think sometimes people try to use them and say, look at my team versus your team, and your number 300 versus 100. I think in that sense it gets a little negative and toxic. So I think you need to have a fine mix in how you use that.
Yeah, I definitely think culture plays a big part in that, right? And we were talking with Brett Fraser over at Sunbasket, and he's like, I can't stand wall boards. I hate them because they're a very service-oriented business doing food delivery, and the same thing where you have to make sure that your members are happy. It's not like a sales org where it's like just bang out calls, like you're like in a boiler room, doing outbound predictive dialing all day long. This is not the culture that you want.
Yeah.
Troy, are you guys doing quality monitoring scorecards? And with those scorecards, are you doing any gamification around that? you hit 5 out of 5 on that scorecard. So, you did that 3 times in a row. So you get a little kudos for that. Like, tell us a little bit more about your quality program.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that's evolved over the years. I don't know about you guys, but what I've seen from the quality, that's kind of the police is what some organizations look at it as. And it's like we had some of that a while back, and we really worked hard amongst those teams to show, again, going back to partnership, right? So looking at it through a lens of, I am quality and you as an advocate are my customer, right? And so I'm not only looking at it from a regulatory lens to say, did you document correctly? Did you, finish on service the member in the right way? But here are some opportunities to improve. Here's some coaching aspects, and then bringing in the supervisors from that aspect to then get ownership and buy-in, right? So you as an advocate are probably going to have more, invested in your supervisor telling you and coaching you than me from the outside. And so there's those kind of levers that we look at from, hey, how do we partner as internal members and customers and then drive the quality standards from there? So yeah, there is some gamification from a aspect of, hey, I got kudos for that, or I was able to get into, the recognition for the month, or I got a perfect score. So we have the kind of this, standard of perfect scores for the month. And then we have recognition that comes out behind that. So it's really more about that. But then the bigger piece, broader, is really internal membership and guidance and coaching and getting better than it is, I caught you doing something wrong. And that took a while. It's a mindset. And even within our quality team, right? It's like, you're not the police, you're kind of helping them, and here's the way you need to do it. So it's a two-way street we've got to work through.
It's so interesting because you can point this all back to sports, right? There's the coach that is just the busting, the hammer, bringing the hammer down. That's the safe way of saying it.
Yeah.
Bringing the hammer down. But then you have the coaches, like you look like a John Wooden, right? Where it's like, he is coaching these kids for life, not just for basketball, at UCLA for their 1 or 2 years that they're there. And it's so much so in business too, right? And it seems like with your leadership style is very similar to that, where you're trying to elevate, the people under you that you manage to give them an opportunity to have a career path, not just be on the phones or, in front of working in member services their whole career. How else, how would you say that your leadership style has grown or matured since you've been in business? And what is the style that you say you have?
Yeah, no, it's collaborative in nature, right? When you look at it, we definitely won't bring too much politics into it, but let's say a president has a cabinet, right? And the goal of that is to have, you're not the smartest guy in the room necessarily, but you have the smartest people in the room around you to then go out and conquer what you need. And so I look at it from more collaborative perspective, not afraid to roll up my sleeves and help people understand that, we're somewhat equals and colleagues versus this hierarchical perspective. And there's some things that need to be they're non-negotiable, they have to happen. And those things I will bring to the table, right, as such. But outside of that, then it's like, we talked a little bit about empowerment and what are they're the ones that are on the front lines day in and day out. They're hearing, our members in some cases, hey, I have expenses that are, my medicine or my rent, my medicine or my food. Those are real issues that we're trying to help people through from time to time. And so for me, kind of to sit in an ivory white tower and tell someone on the front line how they need to do that is not realistic in my viewpoint. So my style is very collaborative, very humane, very humble. And really trying to, provide direction and vision for, and clearing roadblocks, clearing paths, making sure they have the right tools to do their job and that they feel supported, right? I feel like any good leader is really there to support their staff and work on behalf of their staff to allow them to get where they need to go.
And you talked a little bit about, how important these phone calls are, not only to the member, but also how important the agent has to listen and have empathy and compassion. What about the opposite? Are you getting a lot of calls that are very transactional, where it's like a reset password or update my billing information, where it's not, there's no level of empathy that's needed, there's no level of compassion, it's just doing a task? And if so, is it hard for an agent to switch from super empathetic compassionate type conversations to very mundane, just click a couple of buttons and then process the conversation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, at least my experience when I've been able to talk to some of the folks, for them, that's what they call the easy call, right? And so they're very they can switch on a dime with that. And some members want to kind of hang out and tell you a joke and kind of tell you, hey, this is their day. And sometimes they want to just really be transactional and get off the phone. And I think our advocates do an awesome job being able to kind of understand and hear tone and address that as such. So I would say it's fairly simple, because it's, do you need an ID card? Do you need me to process this? And they can really get to business and along the way have a conversation, wrap it up, and then move on in those cases to the next one. But it's never at least most of the time, right? You can't account for everyone's personality every day of the week, but in general, it's really around having that compassion and that empathy and never treating it as a transaction, right? So that is one thing that we will not do. When my mother was on this earth, she was a member of SCAN. And so what I would tell the new hire classes is to this day is I would go in and say, my mother was as a member, and here's the expectation is that every call is that she's at the end of that line. And that's how I expect every member to be treated. And so that's a pretty high bar, right? For folks to kind of be able to control. And so that's just kind of the passion that I think a number of us bring to the table, and we address our business as such.
I love that saying. I used to have, when I moved out to college, at a dorm room, and my dad came in once, my mom wasn't there. My dad came in and he said, I want you to clean this room every day as if your mom's coming in to check in, see how clean it is. And that's so true. Like, why did I let myself go? And, you should have that standard of,
if only,
keep a clean room as if your mom was in here checking for dust,
Yeah.
So I love that. I'll borrow that. I'm not going to steal it, but I love that.
That's all good. You can leverage it.
Leverage it. There you go. You leverage it. That's true though, because if it's like if anyone's grandma is on the other end of that line, you're gonna treat that person differently. And the older the member is, it can be challenging because they don't track as well, or cognitively they're not as sharp. So it can you definitely have to have a lot of empathy, I can imagine, on those calls when they're just not understanding something.
Yeah, and I go back to there's some of that, right? But I would also clarify that from it depends, right? Because I can get an 80 or 90-year-old on the phone that will challenge you,
Yeah.
kind of toe to toe, right? And so I do think there is a spectrum, and again, that goes back to identifying that, but being able to kind of meet them where they are. What are their needs? What do they need to kind of solve for? But there is a different spectrum of folks out there.
Yeah, I was out, and this is a story about Easter weekend again. Sorry, you brought something that sparked my mind. We were out there. We play this game called Pickleball, which is basically a lighter version of tennis. It's less intense on your joints, and you play with this like wiffle ball, which moves smaller. And it's my in-laws live in a 65 plus, or maybe it's a 55 plus community, and there's people out there playing on the tennis court, and they are just like, I'm watching that, I'm like, I can't even do anything close to that. Like, I wish I'm in their shape when I'm their age. So yeah, just goes to show that there's definitely a spectrum. I'd love to ask Troy one last question on my side. I know we're getting close to time, but one last question on my side. We like to ask this question to a lot of our guests. It's when was the last time you had a really good customer experience with some sort of company or brand, and what was it and what made it so great?
Yeah, that's well, these days it's probably takeout, right? Because we haven't done a lot of not quite ready to get out there in the masses yet. But I think it wasn't so good, and I won't disclose kind of who, but we did a pickup, right? And my kids were down at the mall, and so we were texting back and forth, hey, why don't you pick up some dinner while you're there? Bring it on home. They're all great. Dad, can you put in the order online? And so I put it in with some special, kind of facts around it. And they go, I give them the order number, print that out, send it to them. So they go, and they go to pick up and they're like, wow, we don't have that order. We see the completed order. And so we did it well in advance while they were doing their thing. They were going to just kind of go scoop it up and come home.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the first strike. They got there. So then they said, okay, I said, get a manager. Let me speak to them. And so then they're like, we're sorry, we'll expedite it. So they go to the grill, get it kicked in. And then they did do a good job recovering in that aspect. So then they get home and then they're missing like a key salad, which is like one of the main things that we like from that area. And so then it's kind of like, okay, we've already waited almost an hour and a half. They expedited what they could do. Now they ship it and pack it and it's wrong. And so then to call back, and as soon as I call back, the manager's like, I know who you are. I apologize. I spoke with your kids. And so then, they sent out a gift card, to kind of try to mend things. So it was kind of good and bad, but I think it really kind of, missed the mark, but they tried to recover. So
the key was, do they have empathy for your situation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And try to make it right. Food is hard. And it's funny because going back to Brett over at Sunbasket, they have the same issue, right? If something gets messed up, this is a meal that's being delivered. They can't just run out. Throwing someone like a $50 gift card doesn't just fix the problem. You'll just throw money at it, so it's
right.
It's tricky, right? Being in the food services business for sure. But I think ultimately it comes down to being heard, having empathy, and trying to do what's right for the member, doing what's right for the customer, right? It was what it comes down to. Yeah. But we are up against time, but Troy, man, I'm glad you came on. This has been good. Local Southern California guy. I mean, your kids go to USC. I should have had you on here for the first guest. I've got a USC bias. Man,
I'll come back, Alex.
Hopefully this won't be the last. Yeah. And when things open back up, we'll definitely be seeing you hopefully at some of these contact center events coming out, and we'll see. Maybe end of the year, vaccines are rolling out. So hopefully it won't be too long here.
Yeah, definitely look forward to it.
Thanks, Troy, so much. It's been a pleasure. Can't wait for a version 2 of the podcast. Love to invite you back.
Definitely. Sounds good. You guys have a good afternoon.
You too. Well, that wraps up the show for today. Thanks for joining, and don't forget to join us next week as we bring another guest in to talk about the trends around cloud contact center and customer experience. Also, you can find us at adleradvisors.com, LinkedIn, or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week on another Cloud Podcast.